Chapter 3. Cambridge. Cambridge, a university town built in a featureless, flat landscape. So featureless and flat you wonder why anyone chose it as a location for anything. The magnificence of St. John's, the noteworthy splendour of Trinity, the sheer pauntliness of the Backs. And gazing at the magnificent, noteworthy, sheer splendour of the Pauntly King's College Chapel, it would be a world-weary traveller indeed who did not pause to think, why the fuck didn't they build the whole town 2 inches to the right? A fair, if somewhat rudely couched question, to which an answer may be found only by turning back the clocks of time. Let us imagine it is the year 1282. An urgent message arrives at the court of King Edward I. "Most noble sire, I have built a bridge over the river Cam." The royal reply, dispatched with all regal velocity, reads, "Whatever for?" Thus the enterprising but foolhardy pontifex was left with a bridge on his hands. Since it was apparent to everyone that this newly constructed thoroughfare, leading as it did from nowhere in particular to nowhere else at all, was a fumble. Occasional passers-by would point and mock, saying, "Who's the bloody fool that built a bridge here?" "I don't know, must be wrong in the head," he would reply, puce with shame. For years he sat by the bridge, wearing a weak smile, until one autumn he was hit on the head by a golden delicious. "Eureka!" he barked, evenly, with a Job-like disregard for time and place. Then, in a daze, he made his second big mistake. Rather than building some decent restaurants, a couple of pubs and a laundromat to attract human beings to his bridge, he hit on the rather dull idea of erecting some very high walls behind which a semi-aristocratic elite could hide from the outside world and go to each other's rooms for sherry. This was an extract from the Reverend E. W. Shepherd Walwyn's The Bridge over the River Cam, 1884. It is the year 1958. A Ford Anglia is juddering south along the A604, containing Chief Inspector and Mrs. Chapman, and a rather spotty figure precociously dressed in the kind of suit that he thinks doctors might wear. We arrived at Emmanuel College. I left 2 quivering parents and attempted to saunter past a lot of very important-looking people in gowns and stared around the courtyard. I could see no sign of a master's lodge. Overawed by the pauntly magnificence of the groups of overtly amusing academics, I asked an old gardener where it was. He told me. I found the door, but I was a quarter of an hour early, so I walked around for a time, trying not to look conspicuous and wondering why everyone was staring at me. At last it was 4 o'clock. I knocked on the door and was greeted by the gardener, who asked me to come through to his study. I said yes quite a lot, and nodded, particularly when he was talking about the history of coal mining and the Industrial Revolution. But when asked whether I was going to pass my A-levels, I gave a definite no to physics. He was clearly impressed by this, and at last, sensing a possible argument, thrust forward his head, raised his eyebrows to the point of nearly covering his bald patch, and asked, "Why not?" Well, I'm not sure." "Not sure? That means you're in doubt." "Well, yes." "Do you mean yes?" Yes. So a pass is quite possible?" Yes, possible." "Probable even?" "Well, let me put it another way. Are you going to fail?" "No." "Good. Then we'll see you in October." I left and stood for a moment in the corridor, trying to work out whether he had said yes or no. I decided that it amounted to an almost definite yes. Walked back through the courtyard, feeling that it was mine already, and was rather annoyed that no one was staring at me. "How did it go?" said the Anglia. "Oh, fine. Mind you, I've got to pass physics." "Well, you do that," it said, "won't you?" "Yes," I replied confidently. The engine choked a few times and then purred into motion. "I think we licked them this time," said Flying Officer Edith, casting a victorious eye over the fast-disappearing seat of learning she had come to hate during her 1¼ hour ordeal. Chief Inspector Biggles opened the throttle. He relaxed back into his seat with a satisfied grin as the familiar drone of the 927cc engine sped us on our way to eternity and sandwich spread on toast. A week later I was beginning to have my doubts. Could the man really have said yes, just like that? Would the rest of the college back up a gardener's judgment on my admission to Cambridge University? I was glad that while waiting for written confirmation I had been accepted by 2 London teaching hospitals, more realistic goals for a Melton Mowbray Grammar School oik. At St. Swithin's Hospital I had been submitted to 20 seconds of searching questions. Dean: "Do you play rugby?" Me: "Yes." Warden: "We've got a John Chapman here. Is he any relation of yours?" Me. Yes, he's my brother. Warden. Right, see you in September. Dean. Wait a moment, what position do you play? Me. Second row. Dean. September it is then. St. Mary's Hospital, if anything, was much tougher. I was seated in a room with a 110-page intelligence test to be completed in 15 minutes. An official started the clock and left me to it. After 10 minutes I was still less than halfway through, and as always in moments of panic I thought, "Steady on, old man, you are English," and stopped. I lit my pipe and stared blankly at the clock for a whole minute. Picked it up out of curiosity and toyed with it and put it down again. Somehow or other it now seemed I had another 10 minutes to spare, which I thought I might as well spend completing their test. "Hang on, aren't you cheating?" I asked myself. "Yes, intelligently," I replied. After lunch I returned for my interview. As I entered, the two interviewers flinched, because as far as they were concerned, they were looking at a person with an IQ of 495. They blinked a little nervously and fell back onto the only line of questioning which they thought could outmaneuver Einstein and Bertrand Russell rolled into one. "Dean, do you play much sport?" Me. "I'm very fond of mountaineering, but I've only led a few very severe climbs, and I'm not very experienced on snow and ice work. I play second row for Melton Mowbray Rugby Football Club, first team, and my brother is captain of the first 15 at Barts, though despite being 6 foot 4 inches tall, I'm faster than him over 100 yards, having clocked 10.4 seconds at the age of 15 and a half. And I was second in the All England Amateur Athletics Association 440-yard competition last year, the winner of which was Malcolm Yardley, who equalled the European record of 40.1 seconds. I limped in a poor 3 seconds later, but it's not really my distance. I only entered out of curiosity. They apologised for not being able to think of any other questions, and said that unfortunately they would not be able to offer me a professorial chair for another 7 years, although it would be there for asking if I could bear to wait that long. So, by the end of the day, I knew I could have a place at either St. Swithin's or Mary's. I was still uncertain about Cambridge, but felt just sufficiently euphoric to join my brother later that evening at St. Swithin's, where he was holding his 21st birthday party. The next morning, I woke up from a drunken coma to find myself inexplicably back in my bed in Melton Mowbray. I stumbled downstairs to breakfast. Perhaps yesterday's events had all been part of a drunken dream. But they couldn't have been. I definitely remembered my brother congratulating me on being accepted at St. Swithin's. That was why I'd drunk so much. I sat down to face breakfast with a spinning head and a mouth that could have been a British Rail ashtray. There was still no news from Cambridge. Suddenly, there was a bellow from the direction of the front door of our house, which stood in the not particularly portly grounds of Melton Mowbray Police Station. My mother swept into the kitchen with a white envelope, gripped in the King George V Jubilee Commemoration zinc envelope tongs. The jaws of the great tongs parted, and the envelope thuffed onto the blue Formica breakfast table. "It's from Cambridge," she shrieked, feigning nonchalance. "Kiss me, Hardy," I said, and broke the seal of my fate. I read the letter 4 times, looked out of the window for a moment, and read it again. "What does it say?" said Edith. It says, I think it says..." I went outside, walked around the house twice, and came back in to read the letter again. It had gone. There was nothing there. "Oh, well," I thought, "may as well finish my breakfast. You're mad, Chapman. We haven't got any zinc envelope tongs. You're thinking of the Edward VIII abdication mug, which will be very valuable one day if we keep it long enough." The letter was genuine. I had been accepted by Emmanuel College, and I ran away and hid for the entire summer looking after a herd of goats in Caton Bay. I had passed all my A-levels and was very pleased to get 65% in physics and an amazing 185% in chemistry. Unfortunately, I'd been taking the exams of the Oxford University Board, which were regarded with snotty-nosed contempt by the University of Cambridge. Apparently, no one knew anything about chemistry at Oxford. They were all too busy lounging around in bottle-green velvet suits, holding lilies and quoting lines by Tim Bryden and Dennis Keat. This meant that I had to take a separate exam in organic chemistry. And so I stood, facing a bench covered with apparatus I'd never seen before, in a vast brown hall. I wasn't alone. There were some 40 other nervous candidates at similar benches, soiling their cavalry twills at the mind-boggling array of jars containing alien chemicals. 40 brains turned to dry ice as the invigilator stepped onto his podium and started the competition by saying, "Gentlemen, you may now begin."